that was done right around Christmas, so that we have some kind of certainty, even if it's just for 10 months, that people's taxes won't go up. So we're trying to get that deal done, and hopefully the Democrats in the Senate will agree with us that this is something that needs to happen quickly.
And the House is now in session.
Honorable Shelley Moore Capito to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We thank you once again that we, your creatures, can come before you and ask guidance for the men and women of this assembly. Send your spirit of wisdom as they enter into a long weekend for constituent visits. May their ears and hearts be open to listen to the hopes and needs of those whom they represent. Please keep all the members of this Congress and all who work for the People's House in good health, that they might faithfully fulfill the great responsibility given them by the people of this great nation. Bless us this day and every day. May all that is done here this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House her approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side. For what purposes, gentlemen from Oklahoma, rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, I should manage to consent for that and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, with less than 3 weeks to go before the payroll Social Security tax extension expires, it is time for the Conference Committee to make up their mind on the way forward and to bring out their proposal to the full House and Senate. Long secret negotiations are unjustified. The House passed a full year extension on the payroll tax deduction, major reforms of the unemployment insurance, and a 2-year extension to the Medicare doc fix 8 weeks ago. Since that time, nothing has been done in the daylight to resolve this issue. Our delay will cause companies all over the country to work overtime this month to revise their payroll formula. We should help the people who create the jobs around the country, not give them even more consternation. Chad Richardson, the CEO of Paycom, wrote a terrific op-ed in The Hill this week. He doesn't care which tax rate we set, but he's truly frustrated when we delay our decisions, then dump all the last-minute work on them and the thousands of other companies around the country. If we expect American companies to pay their taxes on time, we should get the tax rate done on time. With that, I yield back.
For what purposes, the gentlelady from New York, rise? Without objection. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a minute ago, we heard our chaplain beseech us to be open to the hearts and minds of the people we represent. That is exactly why today we need to pass the Stock Act to stop inside trading on congressional knowledge. This has waited too long, Madam Speaker. My colleague from upstate New York, Louise Slaughter, has led the charge for this for 6 years. It is now time for us to take action, and not a watered-down version. We need to stop the insidious practice of insider trading, giving members of this body an unfair advantage over Americans who sent us here to represent them. This practice must stop. I'm calling on all of my colleagues and calling on the leadership. Give us a bill we can support, put an end to this insidious practice, and let us begin the long process of restoring the faith of the American people in this institution. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purposes, gentleman from Illinois, rise?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This school year marks the 50th anniversary for Glenbrook South High School in Glenview, Illinois. I want to congratulate Glenbrook South on this impressive achievement. Over the past 5 decades, over 27,000 students have graduated and are now proud alums. Glenbrook South has a rich tradition of preparing students to be future leaders, including 2 of my team members here in Washington, D.C. Glenbrook South has received many accolades over the years, and that is due in large part to the dynamic teachers, the families who support the school, the students who work hard to excel in academics, sports, music, debate, and more. I've had the privilege of visiting with the students at Glenbrook South and talking with them about how their government works. I'm deeply impressed with the students' insights, their desire to get involved, to make the world a better place. Congratulations, Glenbrook South High School, on your achievement. I know there will be many more to come, and that's just the way it is.
The gentlewoman from Florida rise. The gentleman's recognized.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. I rise to urge our colleagues to support the Stock Act when it comes up later today. The Stock Act is the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. It essentially bans members of Congress from using their position and information that is not available to the general public for their own personal gain, such as purchasing stocks based upon information we learned from a briefing here under Capitol Hill. Public office is a public trust, and rules that apply to our neighbors and Americans all across the country should equally apply to members of Congress. I'd like to congratulate my colleague, Congresswoman Louise Slaughter from New York, and Congressman Tim Walz from Minnesota, who have worked on this legislation year in and year out. Colleagues, we should all vote in favor of the Stock Act. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to commend the House for passing the Budget and Accounting Transparency Act earlier this week. This much-needed reform will increase transparency and accuracy in budgeting for federal credit programs like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In addition, this reform will require fair value accounting for federal programs that make direct loans or loan guarantees. Earlier this year with the Solyndra debacle, we found out that when Washington makes a bet, the American taxpayer is often left with the bill. The federal government should consider fair value and market risk before betting on companies like Solyndra. Since the financial crisis began, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have become the financial responsibility of the federal government. However, the Office of Management and Budget has not accounted for the Fannie and Freddie burden. This bill will fix that mistake. If we're going to get out of this financial mess, we have to be honest about how much we're really spending. This is a common sense reform that will help lawmakers be better stewards of our hardworking constituents' tax dollars. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today because I believe this Congress needs to stop playing blame games and start working together to reignite the American dream by helping our nation's small businesses and entrepreneurs and empowering a thriving middle class. Small businesses are the pulse of the American enterprise and the creators of jobs and economic growth up and down main streets across the United States of America. Entrepreneurs are the dreamers, the movers, shakers, and builders that help take ideas and inventions and turn them into the manufacturing jobs of the future. And a thriving middle class, well, that's the underpinning of support to make reigniting the American dream even possible. A strong middle class leads to a strong America. The best functioning democracies around the world share one thing in common: a thriving middle class. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to ask my colleagues to enact policies and legislation that achieve these ends, to reignite the American dream by building up our small businesses, encouraging our entrepreneurs, and empowering our middle class. We can start by extending the payroll tax cut for the remainder of the year without delay and without games. I look forward to continuing to work toward these ends throughout the year. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those who say that conservative opposition to the Obama administration's rules on forcing religious groups to provide birth control coverage in their insurance plans is an assault on women are wrong and short-sighted. That rule is an assault on all Americans and on the First Amendment of the Constitution. It reminds me of a famous quote attributed to Pastor Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak out because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Mr. Speaker, we have to speak out on this issue. It is an assault on the First Amendment. It's an assault on the rights of all Americans, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Request permission to address the House, Mr. Speaker, for 1 minute and revise to extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, members, when the U.S. economy is showing signs of progress, our House majorities threatening to take 2% of the gross national product out of our economy, killing the gains we've made and doing it on the back of the people who need help the most, the middle class and the unemployed. Even though we were able to extend the payroll tax cut, unemployment insurance, and also the Medicare physician payments for just 2 months, millions of Americans dodged an average of $1,500 from a GOP tax hike. Now it's time to get to work and pass a year-long extension of these 3 important programs. We cannot afford to take more risk with incomes of 160 million Americans the way the House majority did at the end of 2011. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Stock Act, Stop Trading in Congressional Knowledge Act, which strengthens current House rules banning members of Congress from profiting financially from their position. It is absolutely unacceptable for those in any branch of government, the legislative, the judiciary, or the executive branch, to profit from non-public information. Insider trading is not only unethical, it is illegal, no matter who you are. But if it takes a stronger, tougher bill to set the record straight, then so be it. The American people elected us in good faith to lead, and we must do everything in our power to protect that trust. The bill enhances transparency, something we've continually strived for in this 112th Congress, and I am proud to support the bill. I hope my colleagues will join me in passing this into law, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on the motion to suspend the rules. If a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or if the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Any recorded vote on the postponed question will be taken later.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass S. 2038, the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act of 2012, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of this bill.
Senate 2038, an act to prohibit members of Congress and employees of Congress from using non-public information derived from their official positions for personal benefit and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on S. 2038 as amended, currently under consideration.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, every member of this House has sworn a solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution and to faithfully execute the office to which they have been entrusted by their constituents. The Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act, or STOCK Act, goes to the heart of what it means to faithfully execute public office. The government exists to promote the public good, not to enrich government officials and employees. Those who are entrusted with public office are called public servants because their work should always serve the public rather than themselves. No one should violate the sacred trust of government office by turning public service into self-service. The risk of government self-dealing is heightened by the huge growth in recent years of the federal government and its increasing entanglement with the private economy. The risk of self-dealing increases when the government undertakes to spend nearly $1 trillion in stimulus money on private companies like Solyndra, or when the government inserts itself into the 1/5 of our economy represented by health care and dictates the terms of private insurance policies. The decisions made by big government can have big money consequences. Big government can move markets. That's why we need strong rules to reassure the public that decision makers are not enriching themselves by investing based on insider knowledge of government policies. This is the goal of the Stock Act, and the House version of the Stock Act achieves this goal. It strengthens the Senate proposal by expanding the scope of the bill to require more disclosure and prevent all office holders from profiting from insider information. The House bill expands the legislation so that the ban on insider trading applies to all legislative, executive, and judicial branch officials and their staffs. The American people deserve to know that no one in any branch of government can profit from their office. All three branches should be held to the same standard because all three branches must be worthy of the public's trust. And the bill ensures that members of Congress who commit a crime do not receive a taxpayer-funded pension. The Stock Act clarifies that members of Congress and other government insiders have to play by the same rules against insider trading that have applied to the private sector for nearly 80 years. Under the House bill, no federal government official may use non-public information, which they learn by virtue of their office, for the purpose of making a profit in the commodities or stock markets. The bill strengthens financial disclosure rules for public officials. Financial disclosure forms will be made publicly available in searchable, downloadable databases on government websites. The bill requires prompt reporting of significant securities transactions by key legislative and executive branch officials. This will bring the financial dealings of public servants into the light of day. The Stock Act also strengthens disclosure of officials' mortgages so that public servants do not receive special rates and offers by virtue of their office. The bill expands the list of crimes that result in a forfeiture of government pension rights, and it prevents Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac from paying lucrative bonuses to the executives who bear so much responsibility for the housing crisis. The House bill adds a provision to prevent government officials from receiving special early access to the initial public offerings of stock, which can result in major profits for the well-connected. The bill requires executive branch officials to disclose their negotiations for private sector jobs, just like legislative branch officials do under current law. And the bill makes it a crime for executive branch officials to pressure private businesses to hire employees of a certain political party, a government law that currently only applies to Congress. The Stock Act increases disclosure and accountability for every branch of the federal government and ensures that public servants don't breach the trust of the American people. Madam Speaker, for all the above reasons, I support this legislation and encourage my colleagues to support it as well. And, Madam Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members of the House. We come here this morning as the leaders of the Judiciary Committee, and I have to assume that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Smith, like myself, are deeply disappointed that we're bringing a bill that we've never had a hearing on before the committee before the Congress for disposition. Here was a bill referred to 6 committees: Financial Services, Agriculture, Judiciary, House Administration, Ethics, and the Rules Committee. Only one hearing was held in one of these committees on this measure. It's never been before Judiciary or any other committee. And so I want to begin by complimenting the author of this measure, the ranking member, former chairman of Rules Committee, the gentlelady from New York, Louise Slaughter, for a serious and important amendment that has never been treated fairly. Now, I don't know what the explanation is. Maybe we can get to it during this proceeding. But I think that this is not the way that we want to move forward with a bill that was supposed to get to insider trading ban that everybody wanted, because there's no reporting requirement in this bill. And so I'll reserve the balance of my time and look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Dad.
Madam Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, who is an active member of the Judiciary Committee.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the Stock Act today and in support of extending its reach to the executive branch. All of us who have been honored by our fellow citizens with the enormous responsibility of protecting the liberties of this republic have a duty to hold ourselves to the highest of standards. You know, it's ironic that in 2012 we are here debating a bill that would prevent public officials from enriching themselves through our positions. It's ironic because one of the great causes that impelled the separation from Great Britain was the common practice of public officials using their office to increase their personal wealth. Madam Speaker, 236 years ago, those patriots said enough. That spirit is in America's DNA, and we would do a disservice to all who came before us if we failed to act. I know that a vast majority of my friends on the other side of the aisle share this belief as well. A calling to service knows no party label. Madam Speaker, I urge a yes vote on the bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I am pleased now to recognize the original author of this bill, and because of her deep concern about this matter, I'm going to yield her as much time as she may consume.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for as much time as she can consume.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his generosity. Try as they may, the Majority Leader Cantor and the House Republican leadership were unable to move forward with the Stock Act without keeping at least some of the reforms that we included in this bill 6 years ago. However, when it comes to K Street, it appears that Republican leadership couldn't stomach the pressure from the political intelligence community. And after working behind closed doors, the majority removed the major provision that would have held political intelligence operatives to the same standards as lobbyists who come before the Congress. I need to put into the record that the political intelligence is worth $400 million a year. It is unregulated, unseen, and operates in the dark. Fortunately, Democrats and Republicans alike are fighting to keep political intelligence as part of the final bill. Senator Grassley shares my outrage that Mr. Cantor would let the political intelligence community off the hook. Together with a supermajority of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, Senator Grassley followed my lead and included political intelligence requirement in the Senate version of this bill. I think his statement yesterday tells you all you need to know about his desire to see this language inserted back into the Stock Act before it reaches the President's desk. And I would like to read that into the record, if I may. It is astonishing and extremely disappointing, Senator Grassley said, that the House would fulfill Wall Street's wishes by killing this provision. The Senate clearly voted to try to shed light on an industry that's behind the scenes. If the Senate language is too broad, as opponents said, why not propose a solution instead of scrapping the provision altogether? I hope to see a vehicle for meaningful transparency through a House-Senate conference or other means. If Congress delays action, the political intelligence industry will stay in the shadows just the way Wall Street likes it. At its heart, the Stock Act is a statement of how we in Congress view ourselves and our relationship with those who sent us here. No matter how powerful our position may be, or we believe it is, nor how hallowed the halls that we walk, none of us is above the law. With the passage of the Stock Act, we can move one step closer to living up to the faith and trust bestowed upon us by the American people, the citizens whom we serve. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Back. Gentleman from Texas.
I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, who is also a member of the Financial Services Committee.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly want to thank the chairman for yielding, and thank you for your leadership. I also want to thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Ms. Slaughter, Mr. Walls, for your leadership with regard to the Stock Act. Madam Speaker, the American public believe that Congress has the ability to profit from their position. And while this is illegal today in insider trading laws, I think that we've got an obligation to make it even stronger and even clearer to the American public and to everyone that we here in the United States Congress hold ourselves up to a higher standard. I think this is expected of us as public servants. I am pleased to say that in the Stock Act, in this legislation moving forward, is language from my bill, H.R. 2162, the No Pensions for Felons bill. This language will strengthen and expand the existing law to require that federal lawmakers convicted of a public corruption felony forfeit their taxpayer-funded congressional pension. I know this sounds like common sense, but actually today there are those that are collecting taxpayer-funded pensions that have been convicted of a public corruption charge while serving in public office. This provision adds 21 new public corruption offenses to the current law, including violations for insider trading and others. Additionally, this will prohibit the former members of Congress from receiving a congressional pension if they are convicted of a covered offense that occurred while they are subsequently serving in any other publicly elected office. Sadly, we have seen this before, where former members of this chamber, like one from my state, former Governor Rod Blagojevich, convicted of a felony corruption charges, and yet at age 62 he'll be eligible for a taxpayer-funded pension. Not only is this wrong, this is an insult to the American taxpayers, and this provision will address such violations of the public trust in the future. I want to thank the chairman for your leadership.
Gentleman's time
and I
has
want to urge
expired.
my colleagues, not just on my side of the aisle, but across the aisle, to support this important legislation. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased now to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Minnesota who joined with the ranking member of the Rules Committee in introducing the original bill, Tim Walz. And I will yield to him as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for as much
Thank you,
time as
Madam
he may
Speaker, and I
consume.
thank the gentleman from Michigan. I'd also like to thank the chairman for his support of this bill and eloquent response on it. It's been a long 6-year journey to pass this reform. It's taken hard work and a bipartisan effort. The American people expects and deserves that. When I first came to Congress in 2006, after spending a lifetime of teaching social studies in the public school classroom, I was approached by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Slaughter, and Brian Baird, our former member from Washington State. He said, "You were sent here to make a difference and do things differently. If you really believe in reform, take a look at this bill." I got involved right after that, and Representative Slaughter, I can say, has been a stalwart supporter of this bill. She understood this is far more than just about clarifying insider trading. This is about restoring faith to the institution. She's done this not, ethics it seems to be in vogue right now. It's been in vogue her whole lifetime. She has lived that sermon of ethics and living by the rules instead of just giving it, and that I appreciate. Understanding the integrity of this institution stands above all else. We must, as the sacred holders of the privilege, the honor, and the responsibility given to us by our neighbors to self-govern ourselves, make sure that this institution is never tarnished, and this bill goes a long ways to doing that. The perception is that members of Congress are enriching themselves. That's not only an affront to our neighbors that we're not playing by the rules, it is a cancer that can destroy the democracy. Each member of Congress has a responsibility to hold themselves not just equal to their neighbors, but to a higher standard. The public wants us to come here and debate how we educate our children, how we serve our veterans, how we build our roads, how we protect this nation, how we spend those taxpayer dollars. That's what makes us strong. All these differing ideas to come together for a compromise and move forward. If there is a perception that someone is enriching themselves, it undermines our ability to do those things. So what's happened here, we're not here today to pat ourselves on the back. This might be the only place where doing the right thing gets you kudos. It's expected of everyone else. But we're here to say this is a victory not for us. It is one tiny step on a journey, which is about restoring the faith of the American people in the institution. They can believe with all their heart that we are wrong. They cannot believe that we are corrupt. They will have us, and we will pass, and we will be dust, and this place, this building, this podium right here will still stand. And that's what we're doing here today. So I implore folks, let's come together in a bipartisan manner. And I agree with the gentlelady. I'm disappointed the political intelligence piece isn't in here. But as I said, I believe this is a first step. We can't wait for the perfect to move something forward. So I think it's a good bipartisan compromise. I implore my colleagues, join us on this first step. Give this win to the American public, and then let's get back in here, start working on jobs. Let's get back in here, start working on the national debt. Let's get back in here and figure out how we're going to protect this nation and educate our children into the future. This lets us do that. I think showing the American public we can come together. Let's get it passed. Let's have the President sign it, and let's get on to real business. So with that, I thank the gentleman for the time. Again, I thank the ranking member and members of this, and I would be remiss not to mention a person who was one of the original 7 folks on this bill. Walter Jones has been our Republican colleague, has been a stalwart supporter of this. This is truly a bipartisan piece. Ethics crosses the aisle. Our folks in here are good people coming together for the good of their citizens, and for that I'm grateful for today. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my Texas colleague, Mr. Canseco, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Chairman Smith. Madam Speaker, too often the American people feel that members of Congress live by and benefit personally from a different set of rules than those by which ordinary Americans live. To me, this lack of confidence is unacceptable. It is imperative that we rebuild the trust of the American people in their elected representatives. The Stark Act will help do just that. It explicitly bans members of Congress and congressional staff from using information obtained on the job and using it to profit from securities trading, and gives the Securities and Exchange Commission the ability to investigate and prosecute them just like any other American. The American people expect that those who serve in government to do so with integrity. The Stark Act will help ensure that those in government meet this expectation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize Bobby Scott, the chairman of the ranking member of the subcommittee to which this measure would have gone had we been able to hold hearings. I yield to him as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, the bill we're considering today, the Stark Act, would prohibit members of Congress and other legislative branch employees, as well as executive and judicial branch employees, from using non-public information derived from an individual's position or gained from the performance of an individual's duties for personal benefit. Today we're amending the Senate-passed bill, S-2038, with a substitute that makes some changes to the Senate text, such as regrettably eliminating the requirement that certain political intelligence activities be disclosed under the Lobbying Disclosure Act. These intelligence firms obtained inside information from members of Congress, their staff, and then they sell that information to investment firms, and the public should be informed of these types of contacts. But with this bill, our goal is to hold members of Congress, as well as other government officials, to the same standard as those in corporations who have the duty not to trade on information that is not available to the general public. And most members of Congress believe that this type of activity was wrong, whether explicitly prohibited by criminal law or at least subject to the Ethics Committee sanctions. And most of us assume that a Food and Drug Administration official could not call his stockbroker shortly before a blockbuster drug is approved and profit off of that insider knowledge. We just assumed that was wrong. But this bill codifies what most of us thought was already the law. Now, this is not a complicated issue. This is the same standard that applies to those in the corporate context. It is wrong to trade on non-public information for our benefit and to the detriment of the public. The public has the right to expect that public interest comes first, and that people should not have to worry about what may be motivating our actions as we make decisions that impact them. I want to acknowledge the work of my colleagues, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Slaughter, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, for their leadership in drafting and introducing the House version of the Stock Act. This legislation represents an appropriate acknowledgement of what most of us thought was already the law, that the national government officials of all branches should not benefit financially from non-public information they learn by virtue of their positions, and so I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. I think we're all aware that this issue came out when Peter Schweitzer wrote a book called Throw 'Em All Out. After that, 60 Minutes did a special story about how members of Congress were benefiting by using whether it was insider information or information that the rest of the public wasn't privy to. And I think that story and the succeeding several months has created a deficit of trust between members of Congress and the American constituents. What I did is I introduced a version that would deal with this issue, I think, very simply. I thought what we should do is mandate that members put their assets into a blind trust so there is a bright line between information that they have as members and their trading portfolio. And if they chose not to do that, they would have to aggressively disclose every trade within 3 days. Now, my bill is not on the floor today. But the version that we have here today, I think, is much improved from the original version that came out. We have an improved reporting requirement that goes from 90 days, not to 3, but it goes to 30 days, which is much improved from the original legislation. We've included the executive branch, which I think is imperative, and we have language that uses the blind trust as a potential opt-out if you're not actually managing your funds. Now, as we gather around and vote on this bill, we debate this bill, I think it's important to note that this is the first step, a step in the right direction. But as we come together and reevaluate what we've done here, I think there's many more steps to take to assure that members of Congress don't profit from the information they come across as a member of this institution. With that, I'd yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased now to recognize a member of the Judiciary Committee that's worked on this matter, even though we couldn't hold hearings. The gentleman from Tennessee, Steve Cohen, and I recognize him for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very important bill, and I appreciate the efforts put in it by Ms. Slaughter and Mr. Waltz, who have championed this for many, many, many years. And I appreciate the Republicans for coming in with a bipartisan effort. The bill has indeed been improved by the Senate, and it was improved through the honest services statute that was added to it, which our committee debated and passed, I believe, in a goodly fashion. I don't know if it was unanimous or not. But that was one of the most important aspects, in my opinion, of this bill. There are public officials throughout this country who have abused their position of trust, and that has hurt all of government, by using their position for personal gain. The Honest Services Statute used to be a vehicle by which U.S. attorneys could go after them. The Supreme Court ruled that there was a defect in that law. It has been corrected in this bill. It means we've got more effective ways to clean up folks who are using public service for their own benefit and restore public trust in public officials from the courthouse to Congress. Further, it makes clear that nobody can be using their inside information here to be making money in the stock market and other places, all of which destroys the public trust which we hold. This Congress is so much better than the ratings the public gives it. Some of us because of a few bad apples, and some of us because of misunderstanding of what we do. This bill will go a long way toward cleaning up Congress and local officials and the appearance of impropriety, which is as important as impropriety. We need to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach, and this bill will do a lot towards it. I take my hat off again to Ms. Slaughter, the champion of this bill, and Mr. Waltz, who've done so much, and I'm proud to be one of the original 9. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the chairman, the gentleman from Texas. Madam Speaker, our government was founded on a promise. This promise was built on a trust between the people and its elected officials. We all have a duty to honor the trust of the American people and to work faithfully on their behalf. Madam Speaker, it is unacceptable for anyone, any elected official or their staff, to profit from information that is not available to the public. People in this country have a right to know and trust that officials at all levels of government are living under the same rules they are. If there is even the slightest appearance of impropriety, we ought to go ahead and prevent that from taking place. It is incumbent upon each of us to start restoring the trust between the people and their elected representatives. That's what the Stock Act is all about. Madam Speaker, members from both sides of the aisle have worked hard on this issue. I'd especially like to express my appreciation to Representatives Tim Waltz and Louise Slaughter for their years of work on this effort. Congressman Waltz has been a leader on the Stock Act since he took office at the start of the 110th Congress, and I particularly want to recognize his willingness to reach across the aisle and keep the lines of communications open as we work to make clear that elected officials abide by the same rules as the American people. This bill we are bringing to the floor today puts in place measures that both strengthen and expand the Senate's work on the Stock Act, as well as remove provisions that would have made the bill unworkable or raised far more questions than they would have answered. We expanded the bill to ensure that executive branch officials and their employees are subject to the same reporting and disclosure requirements as those in Congress. We must all live under the same rules. We also included a provision championed by Representative Robert Dole to ensure that members of Congress who are convicted of a crime do not receive a taxpayer-funded pension after the fact. And finally, Madam Speaker, we added a provision to prohibit members of Congress, executive branch officials, and their staffs from receiving special access to initial public offerings due to their positions. Madam Speaker, we intend to act quickly to send the President a strengthened, workable bill that delivers on our promise to uphold the trust of the American people. And I urge all my colleagues to support the Stock Act. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
I yield myself briefly. May I ask the distinguished Majority Leader one question, why he took political intelligence out of this provision? And I yield to the gentleman.
Sure. I respond to the gentleman. I think that is a provision that raises an awful lot of questions. I think there's a lot of discussion and debate about who and what would qualify and fall under the suggested language that came from the Senate.
And that is why in the Stock Act we're calling for a study of that issue to ensure that the integrity of this process is maintained. But I'd remind the gentleman, the thrust of this bill is about making sure that none of us in elected office or those in the executive branch are able to profit from non-public information. The political intelligence piece is outside of this body, and we're talking about us and the perception that has gathered around our conduct. And I yield back to the gentleman. Well, I thank the gentleman because there are some members on the gentleman's side of the aisle that says if Congress delays action on the political intelligence industry, we will stay in the shadows just the way Wall Street likes it. So I think we ought to think about that, and I'm hoping that the leader will continue the examination of the political intelligence industry piece. I am now pleased to yield to the distinguished leader on our side of the aisle, the gentlelady from California, Nancy Pelosi. 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and thank him for giving us this opportunity to discuss an important matter, the integrity of Congress on the floor of the House. I, too, want to join distinguished Majority Leader Mr. Cantor in praising the leadership of Congresswoman Louise Slaughter, our ranking member on the Rules Committee, and Congressman Tim Walz for their extraordinary leadership over time, their persistence, the approach that they have taken to this to remove all doubt in the public's mind, if that is possible, that we are here to do the people's business and not to benefit personally from it. I listened attentively to the distinguished Majority Leader Mr. Cantor's remarks about the Stock Act and its importance, and it just raises a question to me as to if it is so important, and it certainly is, that why we could not have worked in a more bipartisan fashion, either to accept the Senate bill, which was developed in a bipartisan fashion and passed the Senate, what was it, 94-6? 94-6. It's hard to get a result like that in Congress these days, but they were able to get the result because they worked together to develop the legislation. We had two good options. One was to accept the Senate bill or to take up the Slaughter-Walz legislation, which has nearly 300 co-sponsors, almost 100 Republican co-sponsors on the original Stock Act. The discharge petition has been calling upon the leadership to bring that bill to the floor. What's important about that is that when we pass that bill, we could go to conference and take the best and strongest of both bills to get the job done. Instead, secretly, the Republicans brought a much diminished bill to the floor. It has some good features, so I urge our colleagues to vote for it to bring the process along. What's wrong about it is, though, it makes serious omissions. And I want to associate myself with remarks that have been made earlier, but I think they bear repetition in any event. Senator Grassley's remarks are stunning, and really a stunning indictment of the House Republicans in terms of their action on this bill. He said, and I know my colleague has read this into the record already, but I will too, Senator Grassley said, "It's astonishing and extremely disappointing that the House would fulfill Wall Street's wishes by killing this provision." That would be the provision on political intelligence. The Senate clearly voted to try to shed light on an industry that's behind the scenes. If the Senate language is too broad, as opponents say, why not propose a solution instead of scrapping the provision altogether? I hope to see, Senator Grassley said, a vehicle for meaningful transparency through a House-Senate conference and other means. If Congress delays action, as Mr. Chairman Conyers just said, if Congress delays action, said Senator Grassley, the political intelligence industry will stay in the shadows just the way Wall Street likes it. Well, this Senator's statement is very widely covered. The Hill today has a big full-page, Grassley, Republicans caved. Iowa Senator says House doing Wall Street bidding. I think it's important to note that on the Senate side, there was interest in doing the study that is now in the House bill, and it was rejected by the Senate by a 60 to 39 vote to include the intelligence, political intelligence provision in the bill, rejecting the study. Now that that's already been rejected in the Senate, it's resurrected on the House side, a weakening of the bill. So whether it's the political intelligence piece proposed by Senator Grassley or Senator Leahy's piece about corruption, I think it's really important that those two elements be included in the bill. A good way to do that, to find a path to bipartisanship in the strongest possible bill, is to pass the bill today, despite its serious shortcomings, and it's hard to understand why we are going now, why the shortcomings are there, but nonetheless they are. Pass the bill today and go to conference. Two paths earlier were to accept the Senate bill or to take the original Stock Act, strong Stock Act, to the floor. Both of those were rejected. Pass this bill, go to conference. It's very important that the House and the Senate meet to discuss these very important issues. With all due respect to a study on political intelligence, that's really just a dodge. That just is just a way to say we're not going to do the political intelligence piece. So again, with serious reservations about the bill, but thinking it's the better course of action is to pass it, and I don't want anybody to interpret the strong vote for it to be a seal of approval for what it is, but just a way of pushing the process down the line so that we can move expeditiously to go to conference for the strongest possible bill. I want to close again by saluting Congresswoman Louise Slaughter and Congressman Tim Walz for their relentless, persistent dedication to this issue. Had they not had this discharge petition and the nearly 300 co-sponsors, bipartisan, nearly 100 of them Republicans, I doubt that we would even be taking up this bill today. So congratulations and thank you. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, who is a senior member of the Judiciary Committee and also chairman of the House Administration Committee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, let me just point out a couple of things in response to what has been said on the floor about the bill before us. Had we accepted the Senate bill, we would have had 16 drafting errors not corrected, 16 mistakes in the Senate bill that drafted the wrong provisions of the ethics laws that already exist, and would have ensured that what was said on the Senate floor and is being said here would not be enforced in law, number one. Number two, if we had taken the Senate bill, the absolute prohibition about members participating in IPOs would not be before us. That is an addition that we have in the House bill. That is an additional prohibition. That makes that an illegal act. It has not been in the past. The Senate bill did not even talk about it. Third, with respect to the question of political intelligence, I respect the senator from Iowa very much, but I doubt he has ever prosecuted anybody and put them in prison for conflict of interest during their public service. I have. I understand that when you... Can I have 30 seconds more?
I'll yield him an additional minute.
I understand that when you do that, you have to deal with the very careful constitutional questions of people dealing with their right to apply before the government their grievances. That has become known now as lobbying. It is a constitutionally protected activity. And the idea that we have a Congress committed to transparency means that we give out as much information as we possibly can. Those are difficult, conflicting interests that have to be carefully determined if we're going to deal with the question of political intelligence. It does us no good to pass a bill that will be rendered unconstitutional. And it does us no good to not carefully consider this. As a matter of fact, on the Senate floor, it was Senator Lieberman who asked his fellow colleagues to give them time on the Senate side to study the issue so that precisely they would not render the bill unconstitutional. I might add
that Senator Lieben also served as an Attorney General of his state and knows whereof he speaks.
Gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know that I yield myself 30 seconds. I'd just like to compliment the distinguished gentleman from California who was an Attorney General himself and is very sharp on these matters. Could you make available to us these 16 drafting errors of the Senate? I'd be delighted to get them from you. If the gentleman would send somebody over here, you can make a copy of it right now. Thank you very much. I am pleased now to yield to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of Oversight and Government Reform, Elijah Cummings. 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank Ms. Slaughter and Mr. Waltz for your tremendous work. I stand here and urge our members to support this bill, but certainly I have my concerns. The House Republicans stripped out of a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate overwhelmingly key provisions that were supported by Democrats and Republicans alike. Senator Grassley and Senator from Iowa, who I work with quite a bit as a ranking member, was among the first to criticize their actions. And after they stripped out his provision to require greater transparency over so-called political intelligence, consultant Senator Grassley said, and it's been said again and again, and I think it needs to be played in the DNA of every cell of our brains, that it's astonishing, these are his words, and extremely disappointing that the House would fulfill Wall Street's wishes by killing this provision. That is an incredible indictment, and I share his disappointment that this bill does not go far enough to require the transparency that we need. Let me be clear, no members of Congress should be able to benefit personally from information they gain by virtue of their service in the Congress. However, House Republicans have rushed to the floor, weakened legislation that members have not had a chance to read the way they should have had. Perhaps as a result of the rush, this bill also appears to have drafting problems that need to be corrected. For example, the Office of Government Ethics has indicated that the current bill could be interpreted as requiring that confidential financial disclosure forms filed by low-level employees, such as staff assistants in the executive branch, must be posted online. Mr. Speaker, while I support the purpose of this legislation, while I will vote for this legislation, I have my deep concerns, but as Mr. Cantor said, hopefully we'll be able to address these issues in the future and come up with a better bill. With that, I yield back and thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, how much time remains on each side?
The gentleman from Texas has 6.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Michigan has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. Madam Speaker, we are prepared to close, so I will yield to the gentleman from Michigan.
Gentleman reserves. Balance.
Yep.
Madam Speaker, I am prepared to close, and I would do so by yielding to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee, the balance of our time.
Gentlelady from Texas recognized for 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes.
Let me thank the members of the Judiciary Committee, both the chairman and the ranking member, and as all have applauded Congresswoman Slaughter and Mr. Waltz for their continued leadership, and I'm very pleased to have been one of the long, as they say, suffering co-sponsors since, I believe, the 110th Congress. It's important for our colleagues to understand that I think we all come here with the intent to serve this country and to serve it well. And I believe that when we self-regulate, we only enhance this institutional body that has such enormous history because of the changing times. I don't believe that members of Congress are spending their time dwelling on information that they have and using it for self-purpose. But we now stand here united, saying that members of Congress, employees of Congress, and all federal employees are prevented from using any non-public information derived from the individual's position as a member of Congress or employee of Congress or gained from performance of the individual's duties for personal benefit. That is waving a flag to all of our constituents, to the nation, that says that we are here to stand united for you. I hope that helps us as we move forward on payroll tax relief and unemployment. But there is a challenge that I think we have missed, and I think Senator Grassley has carefully analyzed why he is, in essence, offended, even with 16, if you will, drafting errors, which I hope that as we move to conference that we must do will be corrected.
Would the gentlelady yield to me just briefly? Because we've got the 16 from our distinguished judiciary colleague, Mr. Lundgren, and these are merely technical errors that are corrected by the enrolling resolution that surely he must have heard about. These aren't